Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am super excited today because I have Rodney Smith from Watch It Played, and I've been trying to get him on for some time. Say hello, Rodney.
It is true. Hello. Yes, we've been trying to make this work for what feels like forever since this
Yeah,
industry began.
yeah. I think you were probably one of the first people I asked, and you're like, I'm busy.
It has been
And
like that.
busy you are, creator of Watch It Played, and somebody who has made perhaps more video tutorials than anyone. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but certainly maybe most seen.
I'm in the
And
running at least.
in the running. You're a name in the list. But you also you've turned it into a business, and you're part of more than just a video I would put out. You get incorporated in the rules and in the box and part of releases for titles. But just to kick things off, as part of this Q&A, I'd like to get the origin or backstory and how you got into it. Right, like when did you transition into the tutorial videos, and what were you doing before that? Like, I have no idea.
Sure. Well, I was working with the federal government of Canada. Then I got bit by a radioactive spider.
That's
And
a good
then,
start. That's a good
yeah,
start.
no, I wish it was that exciting, but I was working with the federal government of Canada, and we moved to this little island that I live on now, Prince Edward Island, which is on the east coast of Canada. And I sort of left my job.
That's right.
trying to get
You are
years of-
4 hours ahead of California, not three, but
That's
four.
that's
You're
right,
like
four.
past the East Coast.
That's right. It goes a little farther past that. If you live in Newfoundland, you're like a half an hour even further, which is weird, and we don't talk about it. So yeah, so I had moved, and I was in this new location, and I'd always had an interest in the tabletop hobby and gaming, Magic, Carcassonne, some other, like, I guess you would call either really mainstream or some of the entry level games I was kind of into, right? Although, like, I also
Is
played
it
Next
is it is
Monday,
it
which is
mainstream and entry level? Well, anyway, keep going.
yeah, it is. However you define those things,
You played
know?
games. You
Yeah, I
weren't
wasn't
a
playing Puerto
hobbyist.
Rico.
Yeah.
And but I was like missing being a part of the hobby. I started listening to more podcasts. I started sort of engaging with board game media, and I was on Board Game Geek, and just sort of absorbing more and more of the hobby. And I was in this new place where I didn't have an immediate connection. There wasn't really like a game store nearby. There wasn't a gaming community that I knew of. And the more I listened and the more I got playing games, even just within my own family unit, the more I wanted to be involved in some way. I felt like I wanted to get connected, but I didn't know what to do. I knew I didn't want to do reviews. I didn't feel like I had a very good, like, I never felt quite comfortable in my own skin saying to somebody I didn't know, this is a game you'll like, and this is a game you won't. It was not something that was a good fit for me. And yet I benefit greatly from the services that other people are able to provide giving reviews. But I knew that wasn't something that I was able to do. So it dawned on me at a certain point. I was watching all these reviews for a game I was quite interested in, Mansions of Madness First Edition.
Sure.
And I could not decide whether it would be a good fit for me. I watched like 10 reviews that said it was amazing and 10 reviews that said it was terrible. And I was like, well, which is it? I don't know. And I thought, if I could just see this game being played, I could figure out for myself. And that's when the light bulb kind of went on. I went like, oh, like no one really is making videos showing the games in action or sort of focusing primarily on like a full rules breakdown kind of thing. And this was before like Geek and Sundry and Tabletop and all of that, right?
Yeah. We
So
know you were before them.
Just got to get that in there.
Yeah. And what year is this story taking place?
This was in mid 2011, I think.
All right.
Yeah, I think so. So I bought Mansions of Madness. I did enjoy it, and so I decided I'm going to shoot a video sort of showing how the game plays, and that's really what kind of kicked it off. And I actually posted those videos, yes, on YouTube, but I actually turned it into a play-by-play on Board Game Geek. I went in there and I started sort of a forum thread, and I said, hey, would anyone like to play this game with me? You'll control one of the characters. You'll tell me what you want them to do, and I'll move them around, and I'll kind of play the role of the dungeon master, or I forget now exactly what that role was called now. It was so long ago. But yeah, so that we played through the game basically on Board Game Geek. And after I finished that session of doing that, I just felt very invigorated. I really enjoyed the process of doing it, and I felt like I found something that was a good fit for what I could maybe add to the hobby in my way. And I also, going back to the earlier point, I felt connected. I felt like, I felt like a part of the larger gaming community. And the more I created more videos and content, the more that feeling increased. So one thing just sort of led after another from that whole process, really.
Yeah, and certainly I have to agree in terms of like being participating, engaging, and there's a wonderful sense of connection and value you get when you you start, not only using sites and services sort of as a withdrawal, but making a deposit into the group in terms of getting good things to happen.
That's a good way of putting it. Exactly. You kind of feel
Yeah.
like you're sort of giving back to something that's been feeding your own interests and passions, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And actually, one other question though, but like, so that's how you sort of came across where you're going. But like, you've got a presence, you're super clear, you've got a canter that's unique to you. You've got like, I haven't actually like went through and chronologically because I watch your videos when I want to learn about a game, not
Right.
like in a timeline. Is this
Absolutely.
something
That's how
come
most people
to
watch.
yeah. Is this something that has come to you over time? I mean, I'm sure it got better over time, but were you like, well, actually, as a kid, I was on the radio, or like, did you do anything related, or was it totally, this is the first time you did anything like it?
Well, I would like to agree with you. I do think over time it has improved. I look back on some of the earlier videos and think, well, if I could go back and redo that Seven Wonders video, I would. But I'm not, I do sometimes very kindly get questions like, were you a teacher at one point in time? Were you a public speaker or something along those lines? And I wasn't. But I think I don't know what it was. When I used to work with the federal government, for example, I was in the finance department, very dry, very kind of boring kind of job. But there was a lot of important things going on, and a lot of it was all tied up in policy rules, right? And I was the kind of person who loved to dig into that and figure out, well, why are we doing what we're doing? What are the rules that govern this? And then I realized there's this big disconnect between the rules that govern us and the people who have to implement them, and not really understanding what those rules are. And I watched time after time after time as people were just sort of walking around in a very, in a state of confusion, trying to do their job correctly, but not really understanding how. And I realized, okay, there's got to be a better way to explain these complicated concepts. Is there a way to break it down? And so I think I did sort of develop some skills, seeing people learn things poorly and then trying to figure out how can we do this better. And I actually did make videos back then for at my workplace, these goofy little videos about someone going.
There was a very clear line of like,
there was.
You think rules are hard? Government policy is where I started.
Exactly. It all became much easier after that, right? But I don't think I ever really saw all those parts sort of how they would sort of collapse into this thing that became Watch It Play. But they really did. I've always enjoyed playing around with a camera as an amateur and making up little skits and stories and things like that. And I've always done that with friends. So there was all of that kind of going on behind the scenes as a hobby. And then that merged, I think, with my other hobby interests in a way that sort of worked. Yeah.
And so in terms of, I feel like once I became aware of Watch It Played, you already, had some ridiculous ridiculous for in the context of board games.
Relative to, right.
Yeah, relative to.
Very small fish, technically. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sometimes you just got to remember, like, some 18-year-old kid put out some random video and has more views or whatever than your entire.
Right. Absolutely. It's always good to remain humble about it.
Yeah. But so how was the rise in terms of the content? I mean, you 2011 is a pretty good time in terms of YouTube creators and board games, right? You're in the early days of that group, so there was a lot of growth because of far fewer content creators at that time. But nevertheless, was it like how quickly how long were you in the I've got 50 subs, and then when did you break 10,000 or what was that time period like?
It's difficult for me to speak with this with precision because I sort of I did a number of things, I guess you'd say, wrong or unorthodox as it came to YouTube. I almost paid no attention to my subscriber count. Now, and I'm not just saying that facetiously. I was not someone who celebrated when I reached 1,000 or reached 10. I never talked about my numbers on the channel. It was not something I never got into. And there wasn't some sort of noble thing behind that necessarily. I just knew I was doing something that I was finding fulfilling, and the numbers were going in a positive direction. That's kind of what I saw. As long as the numbers were going in a positive, I was good. Now, I know when I broke like 100,000, which was in 2017, but I have to go back through the analytics to see. But what I did notice right away, this is the thing that sort of, I guess, cemented for me that this was something I might be able to do in the long run. Because I will say, early on, I did know it was something I wanted to try to do full time. I remember it might have been 2 or 3 months into it that I went to my wife and I said, Christy, I think there's something here. Like, this is something I'm really finding I want to keep doing. There seems to be kind of a growing interest as I put up more videos, more people watch. I don't have an interest in just focusing in on one area of the hobby. So the more I do, the more different types of people I'll reach. Maybe someone's not interested in Seven Wonders, but they are interested in, Small World or Mansions of Madness or, any number of games, that I might want to cover, because I was always kind of an omni gamer that way. So I felt like there was the potential to be doing something that people would find helpful and would keep reaching more and more people. So I think, maybe a year into doing the show, I might have put out a call to people like, hey, if you like this, would you consider supporting it financially in some way? Right. And some people did. And that to me was a signal that the value people were placing on it wasn't just in words. They were prepared to say, no, this is valuable to me as a gamer in this hobby, and I do want to support you being able to do more of this,
And so at this point, in the context of support, you're talking about viewer support of the channel, as opposed to publishers paying for the content.
Correct.
Did you do a Patreon, or how did you turn that viewer support, who people willing to pay for it, into paying for it? Was there a website, or how did that work?
Initially, I think memories failing me a little bit here, but if I remember correctly, the first time around, I just said, hey, here's my PayPal. If you consider throwing a little tip into the plate, that'd be great. It was that kind of thing, right? And then after that, I ran an Indiegogo. Kickstarter wasn't an option for Canadians back then, so I started on the platform that was available, and that was Indiegogo. So I did that, and again, people were very generous. It wasn't that I was sort of going, okay, now I can make a living doing this because I've received so much, because it was it wasn't a full-time wage by any means. My wife, Christy, was the largest financial supporter of Watch It Played for a long time, But it was more of a proof of concept. It was like, okay, well, if we continue to grow and approximately 4 to 6% of the people continue to financially support it, eventually this will reach a sustainable point. And also, I did start to reach out to publishers at a certain point as well to say, hey, I think this is beneficial to you as well. My viewers are willing to support. Maybe you consider supporting as well.
And when would you say, because at this point, I mean, it sounds like you've been supported along the way, but it sounds like at this point you'd consider it self-sustaining in terms of, the costs that you have. When would you say you hit that mark? Was it 2016, 15, or?
It was, yeah, I would say it was about 3 years ago. About 3 years ago, I think, between the publishers hiring me for the tutorial videos and the support I was receiving through the fundraisers and little odd things here and there, like maybe it was selling some T-shirts or whatever other little income streams I had. It was self-sustaining at that point. My wife was able to go, okay, I don't have to support you anymore, basically, right?
It's a pretty big deal, right? As a content creator, there's really a minority of folks that get to be at the place where they've made it enough that they can say, yeah, no, it's sort of paying for me to, this is now my job, like this is or my life or my passion, or however you want to think of it, right? But so.
And I was in a fortunate position too. I mean, that's something I would want people to know. I was a little further along in life. I was a little more established. I could take the risk. If sometimes people will approach me and say, hey, I think I'd like to do something similar to what you're doing. And I always want to encourage people in that endeavor. But I also want to remind them, again, it took me 6 years, or however long it was, 2011 to 2016 or something like that, right, to get to the point where I could do it full time. So if someone's like got a young family and they're just trying to make ends meet, it's not like the best way to launch a new career type of thing. It helped that I already had some experience too. I was already shooting video. I already had some of that knowledge, right? Yeah,
no, I mean, that's one of the interesting things, I think, is a lot of the time that goes into it and your position in life and things like that. I mean, I tell people recently, like, it's not content creation, but it's the publishers on the board game side with Pencil First Games.
Right.
I did not take a dollar out of Pencil First Games until last year. This last year was the first time I made any money out of Pencil First Games.
Wow. Yeah.
That
Right.
isn't
So there's
that
a good
isn't
example,
to,
right?
yeah, it isn't to say that Pencil First Games didn't make money, and actually a lot of
Yeah.
other people made a lot of money from Pencil First Games because I paid all the people who were involved in it, right? But like
Right.
and it got more valuable, so it had the ability to do more. But personally, at the point where I was like, and I'm gonna like, I think there's enough in that bank account that I'm like, I'm gonna take my money back a little bit. The first time
Yes.
I felt comfortable doing that, and I'm conservative, but the first time I felt comfortable doing that was literally this last year, and that was on the back of Herbaceous and other things. But the so it's like sometimes you just got to keep going at it for a long time,
Right.
I think it'll be a decade coming that I take anything out of gaming with Edo, but
Well, look,
but
this is the thing, right? Like a lot of this stuff, and I think people recognize it. It is passion driven. Sometimes there is an opportunity to pivot and also like find a way to create some sort of sustainable business out of it. But I think the passion drives it, and I don't think any of this stuff that you and I are both saying here, but some of the challenges, is meant to be like a discouragement to people. It's just sort of a pragmatic
yeah, I
element
mean,
that also has to be applied, I think.
for sure, and I think keeping it something that you want to do and you're interested in and is fresh
Yes.
and all that is a pretty big deal. And that it's a creative outlet or something that engages, or you like being part of the community, as you said, or you want,
Right.
all of that, you get a lot of value at it. But like, if I think you can get caught up in sort of trying to make the numbers work, and if you're forced in that position, it can be tough.
It can be a lot of stress, definitely.
Yeah. Well, and so you've hit different tiers, right? So okay, so initially you're getting, as far as the content creators, and I'm pretty sure you don't do ads because I can't think of any.
I didn't, but I don't have any like ads that I put on. I've now turned on YouTube ads because I've stopped doing my fundraisers. I used to do a fundraiser, a yearly fundraiser. Right now, I've partnered with Board Game Geek, so I don't do the fundraiser aspect of it, but I do have the YouTube ads turned on. It's one of those funny things. People don't realize. A lot of people, some people do more now probably than they did back in the day, but those ads are all content driven, content creator driven, in the sense that if you see ads, it's because the content creator turned them on.
Well,
It's not something that YouTube forces. I can turn all the ads off if I want to.
Oh, for sure. Everyone should know that if you're seeing an ad, it's because the person in charge said it was okay, and the type of ad and the location of the ad. But actually, it's interesting. One of the reasons I ended up turning ads on was after watching a bunch of YouTube things and listening to other creators. One of the intrinsic values beyond monetary, because I don't make any money off of ads, really. You probably do because of the volume, but
but again, it's a good point. Like you make very little until you get to a certain volume, and I would still say I fit in that camp of people who, compared to the bigger YouTubers, it's not what you think.
but like basically, if you're not putting ads on, YouTube isn't making any money off of you, right? And you're making a withdrawal, not a deposit, and so turning ads on beyond just making money for YouTube also makes you are become more visible and in more searches, and you're the algorithm likes videos that are good and also have ads.
Yes.
And so from a reach new audience perspective, having ads is actually a pretty powerful thing. So it was more about the channel getting more exposure than it was necessarily that these things were making any money. But you're at like phase A. You're growing. You're getting support from backers,
right?
Or from Indie. Are they backers on Indiegogo? I presume there.
Yeah, sure.
And then you're starting to talk to publishers, and unless it's changed, the publisher deal's like, hey, I have a schedule, but if you can fit on the schedule, you're gonna pay me for building out the tutorial and doing the video for you, and I'll post it on my thing.
Early on, I reached out to some publishers. I mean, very early on, I was very naive, and I remember after doing the Mansions of Madness video, I've told this story before, but after that first edition back in 2011, I wrote Fantasy Flight Games, and I said, hey, I did this video about your game. Isn't this great? Wouldn't you love to work with me in the future? And they wrote back, it's very nice. No, we wouldn't. And they were very polite about it. But it was a really good kind of wake-up call to, again, like, look, I just started. I haven't proved myself. I haven't earned anything yet. My enthusiasm got the best of me, if you will. And rather than take that as, well, I'm going to show them, I used it as kind of, okay, I need to work harder. I'm going to, I got to keep building this thing. And then eventually at some point in time, someone like Fantasy Flight might want to work with me, right? And that, of course, has come to pass. But it took time.
Did you send them the framed letter when they finally signed up?
I don't think I have that in email anymore. I wish I'd kept it. Again, they were very polite. It was a very reasonable response they gave me. But I did, early on, though, like in the first year of the show, I did reach out to a few different publishers, and Plaid Hat Games was one of them early on. And they, I would say, took a chance on me. Colby said, we don't typically do this, but we're going to send you a game. And yeah, if you'd like to do a tutorial, we'll support that. And that really was a big boost to me. That was one of the milestones for me, because it made me feel like, oh, okay, a publisher sees value in this too. And I'll always be grateful to Plaid Hat Games for that sort of initial sort of act of faith. And I've done a number of their games since then, and continue to do a lot of different publishers' games. But the way it kind of works is there's sort of three criteria. One, I have to have an interest in the game. I don't review on the channel, but the tutorial videos take about a week to create. So there's a sort of a kind of a large investment of time there. And if it was a game that I really didn't enjoy, it would be difficult to sort of maintain what I hope is a positive presentation when I teach the game. I want that to be as authentic as possible. You know what I mean? I want it to come from a place. Also, I answer all the comments on the videos. So if I was doing that, 10 years running on a game that I'd done 10 years ago that I just couldn't stand, I mean, I'd be pulling my hair out having to answer rules questions.
And fortunately, there's enough games that you can be picky, right?
Exactly. There's enough. Like there's so many great games I'll never get to that I'd love to, just because of time. So you're right. I have the luxury of being able to be a little bit picky there. So I have to like the game. The game has to be kind of a good fit for the schedule. If I've just done like 5 heavy Euros in a row, I generally want to mix it up with something different. And then, yes, the publisher, if they're willing to partner with the channel, then we move ahead. And that's sort of the process, really.
Yeah, and I guess I feel inclined to note that you've done a Pencil First Games video.
That's right.
And I'd have you do more, but you're busy.
But we stand, and that's the thing. Like it's true. A lot of again, I'm in a very fortunate position that publishers are interested, and I hope that continues to be the case. I'm hoping we get to work on something again. I know Herbaceous Sprouts is coming out soon, so who knows?
Nice plug. I like it. Thanks. Yeah. Cool. Okay, but so you hit, so tier 1 is doing the content. Right. And people are liking it. Tier 2 is they're supporting you. Tier 3 is publishers are now supporting you. And then this blossoms into 2 things that I think would be interesting to hear about. One is you become like a really known presence at conventions, right? And you never really did, as far as video content, I believe, too much of the vlogging, like convention crawl stuff. But you're definitely, I mean, I guess it's part of your notoriety, a bigger part of it, but also part of your participation, I would suspect. And then at some point recently, I don't know, 9 months ago, a year ago, maybe it was a little more, a little less, you teamed up with Board Game Geek, and now, like, if somebody, I mean, it's crazy, if you've done a video for somebody's game, it, like, gets a banner spot on that game's page.
Right.
So, like, how did that, like, next tier come to pass? Or,
I mean, going back to, like, the convention thing, I think early on, maybe a year or 2 into the show, I went out to Gen Con. And I had been wanting to go to Gen Con forever because, again, I listened to a bunch of podcasts. I listened to a bunch of other board game media creators, and it's hard not to kind of get like, wow, this sounds like the promised land, to go to like one of these giant conventions and be surrounded by people who are, again, obsessed with this hobby in the same way I am. Like, how incredible would that be?
Surrounded like sardines.
Yeah, so much so. That was the part I didn't quite realize. But the experience did live up to what I had hoped from it. It was an incredible experience to go to a convention, and I thought it was good for the channel to be there, to be meeting publishers in person, to be meeting people who watch and appreciate the show, to be able to tell them, again, like I do my best to sort of stay connected with my viewers by, responding to questions and comments and being as accessible as I can. But I think there's also something special in being able to tell someone to their face, like, you watching my show means something to me. I do this thing in the basement of my home in the middle of nowhere, and because you watch, I'm able to do something for a living that I find incredibly fulfilling. I think telling people that matters, and so it's a good thing to be able to do. So going to conventions allows me to connect in that way, and I've made a lot of really good friends in the board game hobby, like really like lifelong friends. Beyond the fact that we just happen to also be into board games, this hobby is about connecting with people around a table, and conventions allowed me to make some of those connections that have now turned into, again, lifelong relationships that I value incredibly. So conventions have become a big part of it too. And then, at one of those conventions, as it turns out, Board Game Geek, I was walking around with, well, the story actually starts a little bit earlier than when we sort of started talking about working together. If you don't mind, I'll just dish some details. But it was in the origins before last. Okay, 2 lessons ago, the origins before that. Whenever that was, people can piece together the timeline. I had been starting to think about, Watch It Played is reaching some of these tiers or whatever we were sort of referring to them as, and I was kind of going like, well, what's the next 5 years going to look like? Like, have I even thought about that? And I started to think about, well, what would that look like, And I was trying to imagine who could Watch It Played partner with or work with in a more collaborative way that would make sense, because I've tried to walk a very neutral line. I don't partner with a particular online retailer because I want brick and mortar stores to also think my content's friendly to them, and vice versa. You know what I mean? If I was constantly advertising a certain online retailer, then the brick and mortar store would be like, well, I don't want to share your content. And both ways that trade-off goes. So I haven't really been able to, and if I focus on a particular publisher or distributor, then I'm limiting the scope of games I can potentially cover, all those things, right? Then, in a conversation I was having with a friend at Origins, they said, what about Board Game Geek? And it was like the light bulb just went on. Like, of course, that makes the most sense. That's where Watch It Played started. It started with that first Mansions of Madness video. It's where I post all of my videos. It's the reason why, and that's maybe part of the story that hasn't sort of been highlighted yet. I think the reason why my videos had some success, if we want to call it that, is because they weren't just a needle in a haystack. By posting them on Board Game Geek, that's where the audience was that would have had an interest in what I was doing. If I posted on YouTube, needle in a haystack. Posted on, Board Game Geek, these are my people, Right. The people who would want to watch something like this. So, I knew the people behind Board Game Geek, and they'd always been friendly to me, but I didn't know them well. So I'd spent that time forward, kind of just trying, when I was at conventions, to try to spend a little time with them.
Rubbing some elbows, saying hello.
Yeah. Just trying to figure out, do I like them? Most of the things I've done on the channel have been very slow, and they've been deliberate. They've been like relationship based,
Sure.
So it's wonderful that they're big, but are they people I would want to do something with? Sure. And thankfully, all of my interactions were positive, and I walked away feeling good about them.
A bunch of nice guys.
Yeah. And anyway, long story short, at Essen 2 years ago at Spiel, I was walking around the hall with them, and basically they said, have you ever thought about working with somebody and maybe not having to do like a fundraiser every year? And once they approached me, and I'd already been thinking on the same lines, I just felt like, okay, there's something here we definitely.
You're like,
Yes, you don't say.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And then would you say, I get, so now you've been doing it for a while, right? You've been partnering them for some time. For the most
just
part,
under a year now. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the most part, outside of conventions, and you're, when you see you at a convention, you're in the gear, you're wearing the outfit, the uniform rather. Other and obviously more prominent posting on their website. What does it impact your day to day at all? Does it impact your content selection? What has that meant to your content creation?
Right. No, great question. When we talked about working together, one of the things that was important to me and didn't seem to be an issue for them is that I needed to continue to make the final decision on the games that I feature, because again, it all goes back to those three criteria. Those things don't change. Like, again, if I'm featuring games I don't really want to do, then that's not why I got into this. Right. I didn't leave the federal government job to go do a job where I'm not enjoying, at least on some level, what I'm doing. And it's a funny thing, because people ask like, oh, what you're doing must be fun. And I try to steer them away from that way of thinking about it, because it's not technically fun to shoot video nonstop for 13 hours in the run of a day. But it is satisfying You know what I mean? Like I'm
Sure,
doing
sure.
something at the end of the day I look back on and I feel very good about. And that's sort of, so I always want to make sure I'm doing at the end of the day I feel satisfied by. And I wouldn't feel satisfied doing something I didn't really care about. So that was a key aspect. They were fine with that. Again, we have so many great games to choose from. They don't need
It's
to
crazy.
sort of set my schedule for me. And there's things I want to do for them. Like look, Board Game Geek is a big platform, but it's a big world, and not everybody knows about Board Game Geek, believe it or not. Some people find out about the hobby through people like you and I, and that's their first point of contact.
Right.
So on all of our tutorial videos now, we have the powered by
Sure.
Board Game Geek, and we direct people there if you have questions about things
Yeah,
that's
it's
on the
probably.
video.
Yeah, I could imagine. I mean, I'm sure they know the answer, but actually, as far as I wouldn't be surprised if one of, if not the biggest win, has been audience growth through transfer from content like yours, right? Like, because a lot of their growth, like the investment and engagement on the site is, traditionally speaking, I would assume to be conventions or board gamers or word of mouth or all that stuff, and probably people
Right.
like looking up, review or rating for a game at a store, but
Yes.
they don't really having a big sort of broader platform, because like I guess what I'm saying is, because you're on YouTube and because you do a wealth of publishers games and a big large spectrum, one might argue that you have a broader platform as far as new user engagement is concerned than necessarily.
Potentially reaching a different audience than
Yeah.
what would it traditionally go to Board Game Geek necessarily as a
Right.
first stop. They might come. Some of my audience would come maybe to me first. As you see, especially after Christmas time, you get a bunch of people who are receiving gifts from Barnes and Nobles of board games, and they have no clue how to decipher that Seven Wonders rulebook. And so their first point of contact could be a video that I've created. So there's a relationship there. Yeah, at the conventions, as you said, we do a lot of work together. I'm spend basically my whole time at the conventions now working with them and trying to support their activities when they have their BGG cons and their cruises and things. I'm there to support what they're doing and to be a part of the activities there as well. And so, we're closing in on a year, and the experience so far for me has been positive. I believe it's been for them, and we sort of went into this with that approach. Let's give it a year. Let's see if we're both happy at the end of that, then let's continue it. If not, then we can go our separate ways, and it's no harm, no foul.
Yeah, and I want to actually use the back half of the chat on some more specific content creation stuff. But the last question that occurred to me on this sort of line was simply,
Sure.
as you've done this, I presume your level of your amount of conventions per year has increased, right? Like, presumably you're traveling a lot.
Yeah.
And much more for work than leisure in a way. How have you been handling that? I mean, has it been all right to be? I mean, it's got to be. I mean, I got to assume you're out at a convention 2 months a year type of amount.
It's I think this year, right now, it's about 10 or 11 that are scheduled. Like I don't go to every single convention, but I do hit.
No, but 10
the
or
big
11
ones,
schedules is almost literally 2 months of your year.
Yeah, it's up there, and so it does it have an impact, for example, on the creation of videos for the channel? It does. I've in the last half year or so, I've sort of adjusted my working schedule. I wake up a little earlier, I go to bed a little earlier, and I'm just trying to be more efficient with my time. And it's a funny thing. I did kind of a half season review recently with my viewers. I did a little video to say, here's where we're at the half point, because we're at the end of December with the half point of the season. We run sort of June to July. Anyway, and I did the math on like how many tutorials videos have I done? I've done more than traditionally, and I've traveled more than ever. So the math doesn't quite work. But it hasn't hampered things, but it may not be sustainable. So I have to find like the right balance for.
Well, I'll use that as the transition point, because the first thing I heard you say that I wanted to ask on the content creation side, and then sort of tips and tricks and that kind of thing, was you're like 13-hour day, something, and I guess the question is that, I mean, are you saying like your work week's 60 to 60 hours of work time, 80. I mean, are you really working that much right now? And that's
You
not a
know,
problem. I'm just asking.
yeah, no. I understand. I always want to hesitate around this question because I don't want to oversell how hard I'm working, you know, because it can start to sound like self-aggrandizing. Oh, look how hard I'm working. Um, but I would say the biggest challenge I have is finding the right balance of work and life. That's something I'm just starting to really tackle lately as it relates to family, because the work can be all consuming. There's no end
Oh,
to it.
sure.
It doesn't stop. You know what I mean? Like, and the thing is, I'm very passionate about it. So like when I worked for the federal government, when I went on vacation, I
You were
was
off.
thrilled. I was
Yeah.
done. I was off.
See.
Yeah. And when I had to come back, it was like, with this, when I have to come back from vacation, there's a part of me that's like, can't wait to get back to work. Like I'm, you know, like that's just kind of the attitude that I'm sort of always in. So yeah, there's a frequency of 13-hour days and things like that. But it's not nonstop. You know, I carve out time to exercise or read a book or spend time with the family, things like that. But it's not a schedule that allows for a lot of downtime,
Right.
unless
Right.
I'm forcing it in there somewhere. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think you have to. I mean,
But
it's
that's
a
the thing.
lot
Like, I think it's the important thing. Maybe I'll just add to that is I chose that. You know, that's not anyone's fault. You know, this is the life I chose. I want to do this for a living, and no one's going to hand that to me on a silver platter. You know, I have to work for it, and so that's what I'm doing.
Well, absolutely. I mean, at the same time, it can be challenging. But being somebody who easily falls into the category of passionate workaholic and enjoys what they do and everything you described,
Right.
and being in the category of person that drove that to like bottom out my family relationships and had to mend that all back together, you know,
Right.
there is a cost to that
Yes.
sort of commitment and engagement, and it's tough because you're right, the content's always there, right? The you know, even in particular the last I've been, so there was a period where I wasn't, you know, every 2 or 3 years is a period between jobs for me where I have a little bit more time to do the sort of this kind of stuff versus work. I'm currently
Right.
full time at another job right now, so you know, I have to manage it, right? Like I have a stack of games I'm pretty proud that I played, but I haven't done any of the videos yet, right? And I gotta find that time to do it. And but you know, you just want to make the decision. Hey, well, you know, we're gonna go to the park instead today, and that's just how it's gonna
Right.
be. But no,
I
it's
think
a
it's the whole
challenge.
thing about, again, like depositing. Like I'm withdrawing time from family, and I have to make
Right.
sure that I'm also depositing into that
Yeah,
as well.
for
Right.
sure.
All these things have to be managed properly.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Okay, and so, but you do make a lot of videos, and a number of people who watch my stuff are always, they're Kickstarter creators, they're people who are making games and products and trying to figure it all out. And one of the things they're often faced with is this need to make how to plays and tutorials for what they're doing.
Right. Right.
And you are perhaps an expert at that. Maybe even a master. Well, you know, I know you don't. But so
Don't set
generally
the bar
speaking,
too high.
you know, having done it so much, right? You have your setup and you're established, and you have your methods. But like, what would you say are like some key guidance you'd give to people in terms of communicating to the listener as well as, or the viewer, as well as how to sort of structure a how to play on video?
Sure. Well, listen, the first thing I would say is don't be afraid of having a script. Don't be afraid that you're somehow being less authentic because you can't remember every little rule in the rule book perfectly by memory. I always use a script for my tutorials. Every part of it is scripted. And I don't see that as a crutch. It's meant to be, if anything, a benefit to the viewer, because in my early videos, I would sort of have a rough outline and I would do my best. And it was probably fine. But one thing I was not able to do was be concise. If you're
Right.
going by memory, you're going to go down a rabbit trail. You're going to repeat yourself. You're going to forget something. And I realized, okay, if I value my viewers' time and their experience watching my video, then I want to give them all the information at a reasonable pace as concisely as possible. And the only way for me to do that, because of my limitations as a human being, is to have a script. I have to have that, right? So for me, I think if you're really trying to create something, I guess, polished and sort of to a certain level, having that framework really helps. It also forces you to really get intimate with the rules of the game, because I don't just write the script out of nowhere either. I'm sitting down with the rule book. I'm going line by line by line, right? And that's where you find the mistakes and the contradictions and the confusions and those things that you realize, wait, this doesn't actually explain it. How? And then you can, again, having that relationship with the publisher really helps, because then you can talk to them and say, well, how does this rule work?
I think you've made a mistake in your rule book.
Yeah, things like that, which do happen. I make mistakes in my videos. Like, people
Sure.
make mistakes, and so this is an opportunity in the video form to catch those mistakes in the rule books and kind of fix them, if you will, after the fact, for people who might watch the video, right? So I think having a script is a good starting point. If you're doing it for a Kickstarter, then you have a real potential weakness, which is blind spots, because it's your game. So
Right.
you know how the game works. And this is where rule books have a lot of blind spots too. People know how their game works. So they don't realize, where some of the weak spots are in the explanation. So I would always say, even though you should be doing this for your game anyway, do a blind playtest of your rules before you do any kind of tutorial video.
Sure.
Make sure that you know where the weak spots are, because you'll find them. You'll find them real quick. As long as you sit there and don't say anything and you watch and just observe, you'll see all the mistakes that person is making.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the things that, a lot of times it has to do with how most creators find themselves doing, and I, observing people in forums and stuff. This how to play videos sort of pretty much always come last, right? Like, they're like, hey, I need, my Kickstarter's next week and I need a how to play. It's like
Right.
a box.
It's always
people are
last thing.
checking. But there's an opportunity with a how to play video, if you really want to have that polish, which is to make one and then, like, use it in those, you blind to test it like you'd blind test a rule book, right? Have people actually watch the video, not during the campaign, and then go from there. I've actually leaned towards, and it's, how I do it isn't necessarily how everyone should do it, which is why I'm asking you these questions. But I've leaned more towards overview than how to play. Like I've, just in terms, like, no one has the game, right? Like they're not actually
exactly.
able
Especially
to play
in a Kickstarter. In a Kickstarter situation, you almost might be doing the game a disservice by bogging people down in the minutia. Because most people I don't want to say most, because I don't know what the numbers are, but a certain segment of people don't need all the minutia. They just want to get a sense of how the game works, right?
Exactly.
So that's where you can kind of get away with maybe giving a more broad overview.
Right. But let's say you are trying to do an actual how to play. So you have the script, and I thought you did a really nice job of communicating not thinking of a script as a crutch, but actually as a value to the end user. In fact, as somebody who rambles on videos and doesn't use a script myself, I thought you communicated that, like, respect of the viewer thing well, because every once in a while I get a sort of a ball buster commenter who's like, I listened to your video and I'm now dumber than I was before, Look,
I have the same propensity. Like, if you give me enough leash, I will talk. Because I have a lot. Like, I want to say things, I want to say them clearly, so then I'll, like, double say them and re-explain them and all that stuff, right? I understand. Like, that was the biggest thing that helped me, was someone in my comments early on told me to shut the F up and just teach the game. And they were a real dick about it, honestly, but they were right. They were 100% right. I looked at the truth in what they were saying and went, yeah, I don't need to wax philosophical about game theory at the beginning of this tutorial. That's not why you're here, right? I need to fall into the background and let the game take focus and your learning experience be the focus. I can talk about games and my thoughts about them, or about the hobby, somewhere else in a separate video. And if you want to watch that, then you can do that. So yeah.
No, it really, a lot of those, like, really absurd, like, nasty troll comments are like, you have to just be like, exactly what you said, like, man, you're an ass, but thanks for the comment.
Yes.
And actually, that I love that. That's my favorite way to respond, which is just something to the extent of, like, awesome, thanks for the feedback, right? Like, just with positivity.
Ultimately, ultimately, I mean, I always would prefer if people found a nicer way of couching their criticism, but at the same time, assuming they're not being a complete troll, it is an indicator that they care.
Right.
That they felt something and they wanted to share something, and that's there's some merit in that somewhere.
Yeah. Sometimes you have, it's sort of like that comment, like, if you want people to respond to your post, like if it's something that people disagree with, they're more likely to respond than if it's something they agree with. Okay, but so that actually, so there's the script and what you're going to say, right? But so the other like really fantastic thing, I mean, among others, you do on other than that very scripted, concise, terse delivery, is you have the B-roll, right? You have the footage, well clean footage of the game. Is in your process, is it script for like? Do you film that and then script? Like, what? How do you handle the like B-roll process?
So I script everything first, then, and I mean, as I'm scripting, I'm not really visualizing it, but I kind of know what the table is going to look like more or less because I've of course played the game at this point. I know what all the components look like and so on. When I'm down here shooting, there's the B-roll, what you could call B-roll, the table shots, the hand movements, all that is not separate. I'm delivering the lines while that's happening. So, I know the parts are going to be headshots because it makes sense for them to be headshot. I'm telling something about the narrative or whatever. But as soon as I'm talking about the components and how the game works, I want the person watching down on those components as close as possible. I want everything to look as clear as possible. And then I'm delivering the content, moving my hands at the same time while I'm sort of reading a script that's sort of off to the side. And I'm trying to make everything kind of work together. And that's oftentimes where the script falls apart. I realize, I didn't leave myself enough room here to explain this, or this doesn't feel right, or whatever. And then things get massaged and adjusted. No, I need to show this card, or I need to, again, things sort of happen on the fly. Because I start to realize it's not working,
And for that setup, are you using a overhead or like a lapel mic? What kind of mic are you using for that?
So I have a lav mic that I use. It's not inexpensive, but it was one of the better investments. It was a Sennheiser G3 mic, I think it was. And I just found it increased the quality level significantly. Before that, I had like a little shotgun mic that was separate, Rode video mic. But I'm in a basement, and sometimes there's a bit of an echo. And the lav mic cuts down on that quite a bit because it's so close to where my voice is, right? And I have like, I'll just look you. I'm in the studio.
So look at that! He did it. Yeah, it might. Yeah, if you just try to keep it as centered, it'll work. Yeah. That's the top down.
Yeah, there it is there basically. And so when I'm doing that overhead shot, the camera isn't actually directly overhead, but it's as high as I can get that tripod pointed down and zoomed in, so it gives as much of an overhead as possible.
And you're not a small dude. You're like a tall dude. So
yeah, 6'1", I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So I like how even in your height, you're like, well, I'm not that tall. I'm 5'8".
I don't like to review my height either.
I'm 5'8". You're a tall dude. I get to say that. You can't diminish that. But anyway, yeah. So so getting that set up is a big deal, and certainly if you're going to do it hot, and the value there is right. Editing sound to footage, especially if it's got the sound of placing cards and things like that, can like be really a hassle if you're trying to do it separate.
Yeah, it's a little more immersive. Like my whole the philosophy, or what I want it to feel like, is that you as a viewer have been invited to my home to sit down at my table with me. I want you to come, hey, sit down with me. I'm going to teach you this game. I want it to feel as much like that as I can, while still, of course, keeping this very sort of strict pattern that's going to get you through it as quickly as possible, which your friend probably wouldn't do because they don't have the benefit of a script beside them, right? But that's kind of the impression.
And I actually realized we've had quite a chat. I get to a point where like my computer's like, this is too long to even continue recording. The last question I have for you. So
you got two talkers together in the video. What's going to happen? This is what's going to happen.
Yeah. But the last question I'll ask you is when you're structuring your reviews, right? Rule books there's some similarities, but oftentimes different publishers deliver rules in different ways, different order or organization. Would you say like, generally speaking, you mirror that, or you're like, no, I have a way I teach rules? And I mean, I feel like if I watch I feel if I could say like in a span of some shorter period of time, I had seen 10 of your videos. I tend to watch them when there's a game I want to play that I like don't want to play. But like, I feel like I might be able to answer this question on my own, so I apologize. But like, would you say you're like, no, there's the way I do it, and they all get chopped up that way, or do you try to mirror the?
No, it's my way or the highway. Basically, I don't. The publisher doesn't get any say in how I deliver the content because I honestly believe, perhaps egotistically, that I know how to do it better.
Well, you specialize in delivering in
For video. For
yeah.
video, it's different in text, so I don't presume to know it better there. But just for video, I feel like I have a better sense of how to put that together. A lot of rule books rely on, hey, we're going to tell you combat. Oh, refer to page 12, section A, and then you go over there, and it's like, okay, and and they skip you all over the place. Or like in the case of Fantasy Flight, they give you 2 separate rule books, so you kind of got like this encyclopedia in one, and sort of this almost the rules but not really over here. That makes you kind of feel like you know the rules. And so for my video, I have to put all that together. So I'm always rewriting everything. So in brief terms, I try to open with a little fun bit about the narrative, like thematically what's going on here. Then the setup. Some people say, like, why do you even do the setup? Why not just skip that? People can just read the setup. But I feel like setup is really important. It gives you a sense of place and context. It lets you see some of the components and kind of get a sense of what's going on just even in that. And then I give a quick mention of the objective. I tend to put my objective after the setup. Some people say, tell the objective first, how to win and what you're trying to do. But again, I like to give people a sense of place and see some of the components before I tell them, here's what you do to win, because I'm not sure that means anything if you don't know just a little bit about the gameplay at that point, right? So I give the objective, and then at that point, I try to follow what I consider to be a linear narrative. So if the game is rounds broken into phases, broken into something else, I try to just do it in order, the way you would typically experience when you play. So I won't talk about combat until combat would happen in a game, but when it does happen, I fully explain combat generally right there. I don't go, we'll get back to that later. I try to sort of break it down where it makes sense that it's happening. And again, in a rule book, you can't always do that. So it's not a knock on rule books, but in video,
it's a different experience.
Yeah,
Though I think having rule books with a setup is a great context for what you're doing, and there are plenty of rule books that have terrible setups, like they don't show it, and you're like figuring it. You know, it's interesting. A pet peeve, not of mine, but apparently of like 5 people I've played games with recently, is games that give a player a decision before they've played the game. Like a game where you know, there's some amazing games that are like, here, draft, you're going to be drafting cards to start. And and it's like, well, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea the value of these cards. So you're basically telling me I can't have a satisfying experience the first time you play this game. I actually, it doesn't like scratch at my heart, but we played a bunch of games where just people were like, what? I don't know what to do with this. So having that sense of place, objective, and what you're doing is pretty powerful. I'd like to have this actually save so that we can share it with other people. So I could talk for another 45 minutes, but thanks so much for being on and sharing your perspective and your history and your origin. It's awesome, man.
Oh, it was a pleasure. I'm glad we could finally make it work. I hope people enjoyed our banter here, as lengthy as it was.
Yeah. I hope so too. But and if you are one of those people, thanks for watching. And see you soon.
Cheers.
Hey everybody, Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks.